So all this while you've had another family? I trusted you. How could you do this to me? How long has this been going on?
Oprah, please calm down. I can explain.
Desmond, I said how long?
4 years.
You deceived me for 4 whole years? Oh my God.
We're pulling out. 3 words. That's all it took to end 8 years of work. Oprah Phillips stood in the middle of her half-finished restaurant, drywall dust still on her boots, phone pressed to her ear, listening to Mr. Whitcomb explain, without really explaining anything, why he and the other 2 investors had decided, on the same morning, within the same hour, that her restaurant was no longer viable. Viable, she repeated, like the word had a bad taste. Last week you called this concept the best thing to hit Shaw in a decade. Things change, Oprah. Things don't change in 4 phone calls on a Tuesday morning, Mr. Whitcomb. He didn't answer that. He just thanked her for her time and hung up, the way men do when they've already decided a conversation is over before it starts. $340,000. Gone. Not slowly, not with warning. Gone the way water disappears down a drain, fast, with a sound, and then nothing. Her contractor was still waiting on her for a decision about the flooring. She told him to give her a minute. She didn't move for almost 5. By the time she got home to Logan Circle, her hands had stopped shaking, which somehow felt worse than the shaking itself. She walked into the kitchen wanting nothing more than 5 minutes of silence before she figured out how to tell her husband that the restaurant, the one he kept calling our future, whenever it was convenient for him to say so, might be dead before it ever opened. There was a manila envelope on the counter, unmarked, unsealed. She almost didn't open it. She had a flooring decision to make, a phone call to return, a panic to manage. But something about the way it sat there, too neat, too deliberate, pulled at her. Inside was a lease agreement. An apartment in Baltimore, her husband's name, his actual handwriting, signed 6 months ago. Under the lease were photographs. A woman she didn't recognize, a child with a gap-toothed smile that she recognized instantly, because she'd seen that exact smile on her husband since the day she met him. She didn't scream. She pulled out a chair, sat down at her own kitchen table, and laughed. A short, sharp, ugly laugh that didn't belong to a happy moment, the kind that comes out when your brain hasn't caught up to what your chest already knows. On the other side of the shared brownstone wall, a man was unpacking the last of his boxes when the laughing started. He didn't know the woman next door, hadn't met her yet, not properly, just exchanged a nod once on the stoop. But the wall was thin enough that grief didn't need an introduction. He stopped unpacking. He didn't mean to listen. He just couldn't not. Hours passed. Then the front door next door opened and closed hard enough to rattle a picture frame on his side of the wall. A man's voice, defensive before anyone had even accused him of anything. Then her voice, calm in a way that was somehow louder than yelling. Desmond, sit down. Oprah, baby, let me explain. Sit down. He sat. The man next door, Jung Ki-wook, sat too, on the other side of the wall, on a box he hadn't unpacked yet, listening to a marriage end in real time through 8 inches of old DC plaster. He'd come to this city to disappear. He hadn't expected to become a witness to someone else's unraveling on his very first night. Hey, beautiful souls. Before we get back to the story, I'd love to know what you're thinking so far. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Back inside, Desmond Walker sat across from his wife with his tie still on, from a workday that suddenly felt irrelevant. How long? Oprah asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told her everything before his mouth even opened. 4 years, he said. 4 years. She said it slow, testing the weight of it. And the baby? 2. 2 children. Desmond? Or 2 years? Both, he said. And for a second he looked almost relieved to finally say it out loud, like the lie had gotten heavier than the truth. Oprah didn't cry. She sat very still, the way she did in the kitchen when a dish wasn't coming together, and she had to figure out what was missing before she could fix it. Except this wasn't a dish. This was 11 years of her life. Whose name is on that lease? She asked. Mine. And the money for it? He didn't answer right away. And that silence was its own confession. Desmond, where did the money come from? Side deals, he said. Real estate stuff. Nothing that touches us. Nothing that touches us, she repeated. And something in her voice went cold and flat. Get out of my house. Oprah. Tonight. Get out tonight. He tried to argue. Tried the soft voice he used when he wanted something. The one that used to work on her back when she still believed every word out of his mouth meant something. It didn't work this time. She stood, walked to the door, and opened it. And the look on her face told him faster than any words could that the marriage had ended the moment she opened that envelope. And everything happening now was just the paperwork catching up to the truth. Next door, Kiwook heard the front door open, heard a bag get packed in a hurry, heard the door slam one final time, then silence. The kind of silence that's louder than every sound that came before it. He sat there a long while, staring at a wall he could now see straight through, even though it was solid brick. He didn't know her name yet. He just knew that on his first night in this city, he'd listened to a stranger's whole world fall apart. And something about her, the laugh, the steadiness in her voice when she told her husband to sit down, stayed with him long after the apartment went quiet. Oprah didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed now, fully hers, no longer shared, going over the conversation on a loop, looking for the moment she should have seen it coming. There wasn't one. That was the part that made her chest ache the most. 11 years, and not one moment that screamed at her to look closer. By morning she had a plan, the way she always built a plan when her world caught fire. Methodical, detailed, no room for feelings to slow her down. She called a locksmith first, changed every lock on the brownstone before noon. Then she called her best friend Patrice, who showed up within the hour with a bottle of wine and a face that already knew something was wrong before Oprah said a word. "What happened?" Patrice asked, setting the wine down like she might need both hands free. "Desmond has another family," Oprah said. 4 years. 2 kids, some woman in Baltimore. Patrice sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped trusting the floor, and the investors pulled out of the restaurant. Same morning. Same morning as what? As I found the lease, Oprah said. Same exact morning, Patrice. All 3 of them. Within an hour of each other. Patrice frowned, the kind of frown that meant her brain was working faster than her mouth. That's not a coincidence. I know. That's not even close to a coincidence. I know, Patrice. Neither of them said anything for a moment after that. The silence held the shape of a question neither of them was ready to chase yet. By the end of the week, Desmond came back once, parked outside, sat in his car for 20 minutes before he ever knocked. When Oprah opened the door, he didn't apologize. He minimized. "It's not what you think," he said. "I never meant for it to get this big. You signed a lease, Desmond. You didn't trip and fall into a 4-year relationship. I was going to tell you eventually. When? After the second baby? Or were you waiting for a third?" He didn't have an answer for that, and for once, his silence didn't bother her. It confirmed everything she already knew. She told him she wanted a divorce. He told her she was overreacting, that they could fix this, that throwing away 11 years over a mistake was something she'd regret. She closed the door in his face mid-sentence, and for the first time in days, she felt something that wasn't grief. It felt almost like relief. Thin and fragile, but real. That relief didn't last. 2 days later, she sat at her kitchen table with bank statements spread out in front of her, trying to understand how she was going to survive financially with no restaurant, no investors, and a mortgage payment that had always assumed 2 incomes. She didn't notice, at first, the small things that started appearing. A space heater on her porch the night her radiator broke, with no note, no explanation. She assumed maintenance had dropped it off by mistake. Then a slip of paper through her mail slot with a name and number. A divorce attorney known for handling cases where money had been hidden in joint accounts. No note attached to that either. She mentioned it to Patrice over the phone, half joking. Either I have a fairy godmother, or someone in this building is very nosy, or someone's paying attention, Patrice said. Some people do that, you know. Pay attention. Oprah didn't think much of it at the time. She had bigger fires to put out. She started pulling old financial records, trying to figure out exactly how deep Desmond's side deals went, and that's when she found it. A joint investment account she'd forgotten she co-signed years ago, the one meant to seed her restaurant once she had enough saved. Drained. Slowly, over 18 months, in withdrawals just small enough to avoid catching her attention. She sat with that for a long time, staring at the numbers, feeling something shift inside her chest. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had taken her future and quietly fed it to someone else's life, one withdrawal at a time, while smiling at her over dinner and calling her his whole world. She thought about calling him, screaming, demanding answers. Instead, she made coffee, sat back down, and started a list. Every account, every withdrawal, every date. If he wanted to play this quiet, she could play quiet too. Quiet, and far more dangerous. Next door, Kiwook watched her some mornings from his window without meaning to. The way she walked out to get her mail with her shoulders pulled back even though anyone could see the weight she was carrying. The way she laughed on the phone with her friend even on the hardest days. Like laughing was something she refused to let anyone take from her too. He didn't know her name. He hadn't found the courage to knock. But something about her resilience reminded him of the version of himself he'd lost somewhere between his father's boardrooms and his own ambitions. The version that used to believe doing the right thing mattered more than doing the convenient thing. He didn't know yet how much their 2 unraveling worlds were about to collide, The casserole dish was the reason they finally spoke. Patrice, never one to let a friend grieve without feeding her first, dropped off a dish at Oprah's that Saturday, except the delivery driver, juggling too many addresses on a single block of identical brownstones, left it at the wrong door. Kiwook found it on his porch with a sticky note that read, "Eat, don't argue, Patrice." And no idea who Patrice was, or who the food belonged to. He carried it next door himself. Oprah opened the door, expecting a delivery she'd already paid for, and instead found her quiet, formal, watch too expensive for this neighborhood neighbor, standing there holding a casserole dish like it might detonate. "This is yours," he said. "I think." "You think?" "The note says Patrice." "I don't know a Patrice." Oprah almost laughed. "The real kind, not the broken kind from weeks ago. That's my best friend. She's been feeding me since my husband decided he wanted 2 families instead of 1. She hadn't meant to say that last part out loud. It just came out, the way honesty sometimes does with strangers, because strangers don't carry the weight of judgment the way people who know you do. Kiwook didn't flinch, didn't offer the sympathetic head tilt she'd gotten from everyone else that week. He just said, "That sounds like a him problem, not a you problem." It was such a simple thing to say, but it landed harder than any of the careful, rehearsed comfort she'd gotten from people who'd known her for years. "You're funny for someone who barely talks," she said. "You're loud for someone holding a casserole dish at 8 in the morning." She actually smiled at that. A real one. The first in weeks. After that, small things started happening that she couldn't quite explain, but didn't question too hard either. The porch step that had been loose for months suddenly wasn't. Coffee left outside her door some mornings. Always black, always exactly the temperature she liked it, like someone had paid attention without ever being told. She started to suspect it might be him, but he never confirmed it, and she never directly asked, because there was something nice about a kindness that didn't come with strings or explanations attached. They fell into something easy over the following weeks. Not romance, not yet, just 2 people circling each other's loneliness without naming it. She'd see him on the stoop some evenings and sit down without asking permission. He'd bring out 2 cups instead of 1 without being asked to. "You never told me what you actually do," she said one evening, legs stretched out on the steps, coffee in hand even though it was almost dark. "Consulting," he said. "That's the most boring answer a man has ever given me. It's accurate. It's suspicious. Men who say consulting are either boring or hiding something." He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't fully commit to itself. "Maybe I'm both." She let it go. She had her own things to hide that month, after all. The divorce papers she hadn't filed yet, the restaurant that was still technically dead, the calls from collections she hadn't returned. Everyone in this city, she figured, was hiding something behind a calm face. Then came the morning that cracked everything open differently. She was going through old emails, trying to build a timeline for her divorce attorney, when she found something that made her stomach drop. An email from Whitcomb, her former lead investor, forwarded by mistake to an old shared business account she still had access to, one Desmond had set up for the restaurant before things fell apart. In it, Whitcomb referenced a phone call from Desmond, dated the same week the investors pulled out, where Desmond had told all 3 of them, separately, that Oprah was going through something personal and might not be emotionally stable enough to run the kind of business they were investing in. She read it 3 times before the words fully landed. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had used the wreckage of their marriage as a weapon, calling her business partners behind her back, painting her as unstable, killing her restaurant before it ever opened, ensuring that no matter what happened between them, she'd have nowhere to go but back to depending on him. She sat with that for a long time, feeling something shift from grief into something colder, steadier, something that didn't cry anymore, something that planned. That night, when Kiwook came out to the stoop with 2 coffees, she was already sitting there, staring at nothing. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I found out my husband killed my restaurant on purpose," she said. "Called my investors, told them I was unstable, used my own divorce to make sure I'd have nothing left without him." Kiwook sat down slowly, the easy energy between them shifting into something more serious. "That's not a man protecting his pride," he said. "That's a man protecting control." "Yeah," she said. "I'm starting to figure that out." He looked at her for a long moment, like he was deciding something. "If you ever want to take that restaurant back," he said carefully, "I might know a few things about rebuilding something people tried to bury." She studied him, this quiet man who fixed porch steps and brought coffee, and somehow always said the right thing without trying too hard. "Why does that sound like you're speaking from experience?" He didn't answer right away, and that silence, for the first time, made her genuinely curious about exactly who her neighbor really was. The office confrontation happened almost by accident. Oprah went to Desmond's firm that Thursday to drop off paperwork from her attorney. Documents requiring his signature, nothing more. She hadn't planned to say a single extra word to him, but when she walked into the lobby and saw him laughing with a colleague, easy and untouched, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't burned down 2 lives at once, something in her chest finally cracked open the right way. She walked straight to his desk in front of everyone. Desmond. He turned, surprised, the smile dropping off his face fast. Oprah, this isn't the place. I found the email, she said, voice calm, steady, carrying just enough to draw attention from the desks around them. The one where you told Whitcomb and the other investors I was unstable. The one where you killed my restaurant on purpose. His face went pale. Oprah, can we talk about this at home? We don't have a home anymore, Desmond. You made sure of that. She placed the paperwork on his desk, deliberately, slowly. You didn't just cheat on me. You used my own pain as a weapon to keep me dependent on you. That's not heartbreak, that's strategy. A few coworkers had stopped pretending to work, watching now openly. You need to leave, he said quietly, embarrassed. I will, she said. Right after I say this, I built that restaurant idea from nothing. I worked every kitchen in this city that would have me, learned every part of this business the hard way, while you sat at home calling it our future, whenever it was convenient for your image. You didn't lose confidence in me. You were scared of what I'd become without needing you. Desmond didn't say anything. There was nothing left to minimize. Sign the papers, she said, sliding them an inch closer. I'll be in touch with my attorney. She walked out of that office with her shoulders straight, and for the first time since the morning the investors called, she felt something close to whole. When she told Kiwook about it that evening, sitting on the stoop with coffee gone cold in her hands from talking too much to drink it, he listened without interrupting, the way he always did, like her words deserved his full attention and nothing less. You didn't raise your voice once? He asked. Not once. I think that scared him more than yelling would have. It would scare me too, he said, and there was something in the way he said it, quiet, sincere, that made her look at him a little differently. That same week, his world cracked open in a way neither of them expected. A car pulled up outside the brownstone on a Sunday afternoon. Sleek, foreign, the kind of car that didn't belong on a residential DC street. 2 men in suits stepped out first, followed by an older man whose presence alone seemed to rearrange the air around him. Oprah was on her own stoop when it happened, watching as the older man walked straight up to Kiwook's door without knocking, like he had every right to be there. Aboji, Kiwook said, opening the door before the man could announce himself, his voice tighter than Oprah had ever heard it. What are you doing here? You've been hiding long enough, the older man said in clipped, accented English. The merger needs your signature. I won't ask again. Oprah sat frozen on her stoop, coffee forgotten, watching the quiet man who fixed her porch step and brought her coffee every morning suddenly transform into someone else entirely. Spine straight, jaw tight, speaking in rapid Korean to a man who was unmistakably his father, security standing just behind him like an extension of his authority. When the car finally pulled away, Kiwook stood on the sidewalk a long moment before turning toward her, like he already knew what she'd seen, and what she'd start asking. You're not a consultant, she said. It wasn't a question. No, he said. Who are you, Kiwook? He exhaled, long and slow, like he'd been waiting weeks for this exact moment, and dreading it the entire time. My family owns one of the largest shipbuilding companies in Korea. I left to avoid signing off on a merger that would have cost thousands of people their jobs. I came here to disappear. I wasn't trying to lie to you. I just wasn't ready to be found yet. Oprah stood there, processing, feeling something painfully familiar rise in her chest. The same feeling from the morning she found that lease. Another man, another secret, another version of herself finding out the hard way that the people closest to her weren't who they claimed to be. You let me think you were just some quiet guy next door, she said, for weeks. I know. I just spent the last month finding out my husband lied to me about an entire second life. And now you're standing here telling me you're some billionaire who's been hiding in disguise this whole time? It's not the same thing, Oprah. Isn't it, though? Her voice cracked. Just slightly. The first crack she'd allowed since the office confrontation. A lie is a lie. Kiwook, doesn't matter how kind the person telling it is. She walked back inside without waiting for his response, leaving him standing on the sidewalk where his father's car had just been, feeling for the first time since arriving in this city that he might have already lost the one honest thing he'd built here. For 3 days, Oprah didn't answer the door when Kiwook knocked, and he stopped trying after the second day, understanding that some wounds need room before they can be touched again. She spent that time alone with her divorce paperwork, her restaurant plans gathering dust, and a growing, uncomfortable thought she couldn't shake, that maybe every man who got close to her was eventually going to turn out to be someone else underneath. But Patrice, blunt as always, wasn't having it. So let me get this straight. Patrice said over the phone. Your cheating husband lied to you for 4 years about an entire second family, and you're mad at the neighbor for not telling you he was rich? It's not about the money, Patrice. Then what's it about? Oprah didn't have a clean answer for that. It's about not knowing who's standing in front of me anymore. Baby, nobody fully knows anybody, Patrice said, gentler now. You build trust in pieces. The question isn't whether he hid something. The question is what he did once you found out. Did he double down and lie more? Or did he tell you the truth the second you asked? Oprah sat with that long after the call ended. It was during that quiet stretch that she went back through her financial documents again, this time pulling together every piece of paperwork her attorney had requested for the divorce filing, old statements, wire transfers, the shell account Desmond used to fund his second life. She'd been so focused on her own betrayal that she hadn't looked closely at where exactly the side deal money had originated from. She found the name of the company on one of the wire transfers, a holding firm registered overseas, routing payments to Desmond through a series of smaller transactions designed to look like consulting fees. She didn't recognize the name at first, but something about it nagged at her, and she pulled up old news articles out of curiosity, searching the holding company's name just to understand who exactly had been quietly funding her husband's double life. What she found made her sit back slowly in her chair. The same holding firm was named in a recent international business article, one detailing a hostile takeover attempt against a Korean shipbuilding conglomerate. The very same conglomerate whose heir had just had security and an angry father show up on her street days earlier. Her hands were shaking slightly when she picked up her phone. She knocked on Ki-wook's door for the first time since their fight, paperwork in hand. He opened it, looking like he hadn't slept properly in days. Oprah, I need you to look at something, she said, walking past him without waiting for an invitation. Before either of us says anything else, she laid the documents on his counter, pointing at the holding firm's name on the wire transfer. This company funded my husband's side deals, the money he used to pay for his second apartment, his second family. I just found an article saying this exact company is behind the takeover attempt against your father's business. Ki-wook stared at the paper for a long time, his expression shifting from confusion into something far colder. This firm has been trying to force my father into selling for almost a year, he said quietly. They've used every method available. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, bribery attempts on board members. I had no idea they'd expanded into something like this. Desmond wasn't running some clever side hustle, Oprah said, the realization landing heavier the longer she spoke it out loud. He was a small piece in somebody else's much bigger game. They used him to funnel money, probably never even told him the full picture. And I ended up collateral damage in a fight that had nothing to do with me. Ki-wook looked up at her. And I came to this country to escape that exact fight, and somehow it followed me right next door to you. For a moment, neither of them said anything, the weight of the coincidence settling over the room like something almost too large to hold. I'm sorry I didn't tell you who I was sooner, Ki-wook finally said. Not because it would have changed any of this, but because you deserved honesty from at least one person in your life right now, and I failed to give you that. Oprah studied him for a long moment, feeling the anger from days earlier soften into something more complicated. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of it. I'm tired of men lying to me to protect themselves, she said. But you're the first one who told me the truth, without me having to drag it out of you with a lawyer. That has to count for something, he said carefully. It counts for a lot, actually, she admitted. Doesn't mean I'm not still mad at you. I'd be worried if you weren't. That earned the smallest smile from her, the first since the day his father showed up. We need to figure out exactly how deep this goes, she said. Because if this firm used Desmond to launder money and destroy my restaurant, and they're also the ones trying to take your father's company, there's a very real chance taking them down helps both of us. My loves, I know this story is getting intense, but I promise it only gets better from here. If you're as invested as I think you are, drop a comment telling me who you think is really behind all of this. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Ki-wook nodded slowly, something steady settling into his face, the look of a man who finally had a fight worth choosing. Then let's find out exactly how deep it goes, he said. Together. Building the case took weeks, not days. And it was nothing like the dramatic reveal Oprah had imagined in the heat of discovering the connection. It was slow. It was paperwork. It was late nights at Ki-wook's kitchen table, with bank statements spread between them, a forensic accountant he'd quietly flown in from New York, cross-referencing wire transfers, and Oprah cross-referencing every piece of correspondence she still had access to from Desmond's old business accounts. This is the third shell company tied to the same holding firm, the accountant said one night, sliding a printed sheet across the table. They've been routing money through small real estate consulting deals for at least 2 years. Your husband wasn't the only person they used this way. How many others? Oprah asked. At least 4 that we can trace so far. People in finance, real estate, even a city council aide. Oprah sat back, absorbing that. Desmond hadn't been special. He'd been convenient, a man with access to joint accounts and a wife distracted by building a business. Perfect for moving money quietly while looking like nothing more than bad personal decisions if anyone ever looked closely. They picked people who had something to hide already, Kiwook said. Easier to control someone already lying to the people around them. That's almost worse, Oprah said. He wasn't just cheating because he wanted to. He let himself become useful to people destroying lives, because lying was already something he was comfortable doing. Kiwook didn't argue with that. He just reached over and refilled her coffee without being asked. The same quiet gesture that had started all of this weeks ago, except now it felt like something steadier than kindness. It felt like partnership. The plan, once it came together, was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Kiwook's accountants would expose the holding firm's laundering scheme to financial regulators, timed perfectly with Kiwook's father publicly rejecting the hostile takeover bid, removing the firm's only leverage. At the same time, Oprah's attorney would file the documentation proving Desmond's involvement, both for her divorce settlement and as evidence for the broader investigation. The day it all became public, Oprah was at her restaurant space, empty, still unfinished, but hers again now that the investors' reasoning for pulling out had been publicly tied to manipulation rather than her own instability, watching the news break on her phone. Desmond's name appeared in a financial fraud headline within hours, his firm distancing itself from him before the day was even over. He called her 12 times that afternoon. She didn't answer a single one. He showed up at the restaurant that evening instead, looking like a man whose whole life had collapsed in real time. Which, in a sense, it had. Oprah, please, I didn't know how big this was. I swear. You knew enough, she said, not looking up from the paperwork she was reviewing. You knew enough to lie to me for 4 years. You knew enough to call my investors and call me unstable. You knew enough to drain an account that was supposed to be our future. The rest is just details, Desmond. I could go to prison. That sounds like a you problem, she said, echoing words that weren't originally hers, surprising herself with how naturally they came out now. He left without another word, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel the urge to chase an explanation out of him. There wasn't one left worth hearing. The fallout moved fast after that. Felicia, the woman from Baltimore, the second family Oprah had spent weeks hating without ever meeting, reached out through Oprah's attorney, terrified and confused, swearing she'd had no idea about the fraud, no idea the money funding her apartment and her children's lives had come from something illegal. Oprah agreed to meet her, against Patrice's advice and her own better judgment, mostly because some part of her needed to look this woman in the eye and decide for herself what she believed. They met at a coffee shop neither of them had any history with, neutral ground. Felicia looked exhausted in a way Oprah recognized immediately, the exhaustion of a woman who'd built a life on a foundation she didn't know was cracked. I didn't know about you for the first year, Felicia admitted, voice shaking. He told me his marriage was already over. By the time I found out it wasn't, I had a baby, and I didn't know how to walk away from that. Oprah studied her for a long moment, feeling something complicated settle in her chest. Not friendship, not forgiveness, but something close to recognition. Another woman lied to by the same man, dragged into a mess neither of them had built. I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt, Oprah said finally. But you're not my enemy here, Felicia. He is. I'm not interested in destroying you to feel better about what he did to me. Felicia's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. I expected you to hate me. I did. For a while, Oprah admitted. But hating you doesn't fix anything. And I refuse to let that man turn two women against each other while he walks away thinking he won something. Kiwook's father returned to D.C. 3 weeks later, this time without security trailing behind him like a warning, and without the same hardness in his face that had been there the day he'd shown up demanding signatures. He requested a meeting, not a confrontation, and Kiwook agreed on one condition, that Oprah be present, since the discovery that exposed the holding firm's laundering scheme had been just as much hers as his. They met in Kiwook's brownstone, the same space where weeks of late-night paperwork had slowly turned into something resembling trust, between two people who'd both been lied to by the men closest to them. I underestimated how far this firm was willing to go, his father said, his English careful, deliberate. I thought their pressure was business. I didn't understand they were funding fraud schemes across an ocean to manufacture leverage against us. You didn't ask enough questions, Kiwook said, not unkindly, but firmly. You wanted the merger to happen quietly. You didn't care how quiet it had to be. His father didn't argue. He simply nodded, the closest thing to an apology Oprah suspected the man was capable of giving in front of an audience. The merger is dead, he said instead. I've withdrawn support entirely. The company will remain independent. Kiwook exhaled, something in his shoulders loosening for the first time in weeks. Thank you. His father's eyes shifted to Oprah, studying her the way men like him studied everything. Calculating, assessing, deciding what she was worth in the equation. You're the reason this came to light. I'm the reason my own life came apart enough to find it, Oprah corrected. Your son's company benefited from the wreckage. The older man almost smiled at that, something sharp and approving flickering across his face. You remind me of my wife, he said. She also refused to let men assume she was simply collateral damage. It wasn't quite warmth, but it was the first sign of respect Oprah had seen from him, and she accepted it for exactly what it was. Before he left, he turned back toward Oprah one final time. I understand you lost significant investment funding due to this scheme. I'd like to correct that, if you'll allow it. Oprah's first instinct was to refuse outright. She hadn't survived Desmond's manipulation just to become financially dependent on another powerful man's guilt money. But something in the way he phrased it, careful and direct, made her pause. On my terms, she said. Full ownership, no interference. This isn't a gift. It's compensation for a mess your company helped create, even indirectly. Agreed, he said simply, and that was that. That night, after his father had left, Oprah sat on the familiar stoop with Kiwook, 2 coffees between them like always, except the silence between them now carried something different. Lighter, surer. You could have let me stay angry at you, she said eventually. Instead, you fixed my porch step and brought me coffee every morning, like nothing was wrong. I figured actions might convince you faster than words, he said, especially after everything Desmond's words turned out to be worth. She laughed, soft and real. That's fair. I should have told you who I was sooner, he admitted. I was scared that once you knew, you'd see me differently. Money does that to people sometimes. I almost did, she said honestly. For a few days, you were just another man hiding something from me. But you told me the truth the moment I asked, and you didn't run from any of this when it got complicated. That's more than I can say for the last man I trusted. Kiwook reached over, careful, like he was asking permission without needing to say the words, and took her hand. She let him. I'm not interested in being your rebound, Kiwook, she said quietly. If this is something, it has to be real. I've had enough of men who only show their real selves once the truth forces them to. I've shown you exactly who I am since the day I carried over that casserole dish, he said. Quiet, honest, once given the chance, and completely unable to stop thinking about you since that first laugh I heard through the wall before I even knew your name. She looked at him for a long moment, something settling warm and certain in her chest for the first time in months. That's the most honest thing a man has said to me all year, she said. Then let's make sure it's not the last. The restaurant reopened on a Friday night in late spring, exactly 1 year after the morning 3 investors had pulled their funding within the same hour and changed the entire direction of Oprah's life. The space looked nothing like it had during those early dust-covered walkthroughs. The walls were finished now, warm and inviting, lined with photographs Oprah had collected from every kitchen she'd ever worked in, every mentor who'd taught her something along the way. The kitchen itself buzzed with controlled chaos, the good kind, the kind that meant something real was finally happening instead of just being planned. Desmond's trial had concluded months earlier, convicted on fraud charges connected to the laundering scheme, sentenced to serve real time, his name now permanently tied to scandal rather than success. Felicia had moved out of state with her children, away from the wreckage, building something quieter and far away from the chaos her relationship with Desmond had created. Oprah didn't think about either of them much anymore. There simply wasn't room left in her life for people who'd taken so much and given so little honesty in return. Kiwook's father's company remained independent, the merger long dead. The holding firm behind it dismantled through a combination of regulatory action and public exposure that made headlines in 2 countries. Kiwook still ran point on parts of the family business from DC now, refusing to fully return to Korea, choosing instead to build a life on his own terms in the city, where he'd first learned that hiding wasn't the same thing as being free. That night, opening night, Oprah stood at her station, plating the very first dish to leave her kitchen, as a fully reopened, fully hers restaurant. Across the room, completely out of place in a server's apron, stood Kiwook, holding a small note card with terminology he'd clearly been studying and still couldn't fully remember. Table 6 wants to know the difference between the braised short rib and the... He glanced at his note card, squinting. The other braised short rib? Kiwook, there's only 1 braised short rib on the menu. Then why does the card say there are 2? Because you wrote your own notes wrong, she said, laughing. The same unguarded laugh from all those months ago. Except this time it didn't carry a single trace of pain. I told you I'd work your opening night, he said, setting the note card down, clearly giving up on memorizing anything further. I didn't say I'd be good at it. You insisted on this for the experience, she reminded him. I never promised you'd be good. You also never warned me how stressful restaurants are. Welcome to my entire adult life, He smiled at her from across the kitchen. The same quiet, steady smile she'd first seen the morning he handed over a casserole dish that wasn't even his, back when neither of them knew how completely their lives were about to collide. The wall that once separated their two brownstones was gone now, knocked through months earlier during renovations he'd insisted on funding, with her blessing this time, full ownership remaining entirely hers. What used to divide two strangers grieving separately had become, instead, a doorway connecting two lives that had somehow found their way to each other through the thinnest possible beginning, a wall, a witness, and a silence that eventually had to break. Near the end of the night, once the last table had been served and the kitchen had finally slowed into something resembling peace, Oprah stepped outside for a moment of air, Ki-wook following close behind, 2 cups of coffee in hand out of habit, even though it was nearly midnight. "You did it," he said simply, handing her a cup. "We did it," she corrected. "I just brought coffee and fixed a porch step." "You brought coffee, fixed a porch step, told me the truth when it mattered, and stood beside me through the worst year of my life, without once asking me to be anything other than exactly who I am," she said. "That's not nothing, Ki-wook, that's everything." He didn't have a clever response for that, just reached for her hand again, the same careful gesture from months earlier, except now it came without hesitation, without fear of how she'd respond. She looked back through the open doorway at the restaurant glowing warm and full behind her, the place that had almost died the same morning her marriage did, now standing exactly the way she'd always imagined it, built finally on her own terms, owned completely by her own hands. "Funniest thing about losing everything in one day," she said quietly, almost to herself, "is finding out exactly who was listening the whole time." Ki-wook squeezed her hand gently, watching her watch the life she'd rebuilt from nothing. "I heard everything," he said, "and I'm still listening."